We don't need to. We're not ready. It was in the slides or the table of contents for this chapter. So, like I alluded to in the accelerator guide and whatnot, you need to come up with a risk plan. It needs to be written down. You need to think through some of those things. And if you're ready for a give back rule, then impose a give back rule. Give back rule, you can't make it the threshold too early. What if you made the threshold for your give back rule 1R? You're telling me, and let's say that you gave it 1R max risk after the threshold triggered. You're telling me that if you have one single winning trade, let's say you start out the day, it's a beautiful day for scalping, conditions are fantastic, you have one 1R winner, and then your next trade's a loser, you're telling me you want to stop for the day? No, that's too constrained. You want to make the threshold something where if you get to it, it's significant and you're okay taking a little bit more risk on the day and preserving those quality gains that you've had, not just small gains. So another thing that could be too prohibitive would be how much you give yourself as a give back once the threshold is triggered, right? If you only just set that at 1R, you give yourself one attempt. Could be too prohibitive, might work for some people. Most of you want to give yourself maybe 2R, 3R, something like that, depending on where that threshold is. It also gets into the conversation of what is your average loss in terms of R. For people who trade the way we're going to talk about trading here today, your average loss is not going to be minus 1R. It's probably going to be something closer to half that. And that's just average, right? Average doesn't actually exist. There's times where we take a 1R loss even when our average is 0.5. It's just from all the scratches. Get a risk plan, get it written down, refer to it, have it in front of you, update it from time to time. More in-depth risk plans can talk about sizing your account up, sizing it down, when and where you increase your R value and corresponding DLL. They should move kind of roughly together. That's kind of bigger picture stuff. A couple questions about risk tools and global stuff. I currently don't use them. In fact, I think the guy who developed a really cool tool in our community for automated risk and sizing and whatnot, I think he's on this course. I forget. I think he is. So there's some really cool tools out there for that. Take a look around in our community. Although I just realized scalpers don't yet have access to our community. We're thinking through how to handle that. Probably going to keep scalpers into the Discord area, but unsure. Let's continue with the course for now. Sizing. Go ask Dr. Steenbarger. Him and I have talked about this one-on-one and in small group settings. There's not many traders in the world who can successfully greatly vary their risk per trade and correlate that data with success in doing so. There's not many folks like that in the world. When we're talking about technical futures traders, it's absolutely true. You talk about some kind of special situation trader that maybe is doing some kind of very, very specialized thing, like taking advantage of sorry, I had I thought my computer might be like trying to update or something there. I had to attend to that. People who are like putting on trades because they know that the certain ETF is rebalancing in a certain way quarterly and they have to buy a certain amount of this or that, and they take advantage of their little arbitrage things. Yeah, you size up in your home run kind of setups. Technical trading is not really like that, guys. I don't care how good the order flow divergence is on an 800 volume chart in NASDAQ. It can change in a moment. It's not as reliable as some of these other more assured special situation trading things are, which, unless you guys end up at some high-end institutional place, you just don't have access to those types of trades. So we keep our risk consistent per trade. I don't care what your conviction is in it. It's kind of 50-50. That is the mentality that you should have. If you, through testing, and you're very good at doing that, you come up with a certain setup that is, just massive expectancy relative to the rest of your setups, okay, like if you got to do it, fine. But really, that's not the way it works. Even people who go around talking about sizing up in your best trades, all these kind of things, we're going to talk about that here. It's not what you think it is. It's getting better at timing and whatnot. It's not just risking, your entire week on one setup with a tight stop. Don't do it. No. So, how do we figure out our size? There's a simple formula. We start with our R value, which is what we target to risk per trade. And then we divide that by the product of how far away the stop is times the tick value, right? So if we're 10 or we're 4 ES points away, we know that ES point, I'm not using ticks here, I'm using points, same thing, just keep those units the same. We could say stop and distance times ticks times $12.50 times 16, I guess, which I can't do in my head. In this case, 4 points at $50 a point, right? That's, how we get to $200 for that. So that type thing. So you take your R value, divide it by how far away the stop is in ticks or points times the tick or point value of that product, and that equals how many contracts you trade. Obviously, the result of that number could come to 2.275, right? Well, you're gonna trade a 2 lot. You can either choose to always round down, or you can choose to round based on the nearest, 0.5 contract. Either way, it's splitting hairs. We're not trying to get super perfect at that. We are trying to get super perfect at keeping risk within a reasonable band of consistency. If you're supposed to risk $100 per trade and you risk $120 a trade or on one trade and then 90 on the next, you're doing a great job. Don't worry. Brings us to consistency. You ever heard that word in trading or trying to be really good at trading? Consistency. Well, let's keep our risk per trade consistent. Last thing I'll say on it, and then we'll move on. If you risk 1R, let's say $100 on one trade, and then you change your R value for the next trade to 300, and you risk 1R, but it's $300 on a future trade, you are now opening up your P&L, your equity curve, your overall results to randomness in a way that's probably unexpected to you. If the big trades miss, you're killing the results of the smaller trades. It'll take you 3R just to make up for that one larger R loss. Slippage and sizing, sometimes can require an adjustment if it's major. Let's say you had planned on having that 4-point stop, and when you press the button to buy, it ended up being an 8-point stop. You're either going to need to move the stop up or preferably keep the stop where it was, and you're immediately going to need to cut your size in half. Don't think twice about where it is, what it is. Just take a look at, I got slipped pretty bad there. I either need to cut my size, in half or by a third or whatever the difference is in where you're trying to get filled, that type thing. You can have a really good like index card and whatnot on your desk that looks something, you just do, Do that. People get intimidated by doing this math on the fly. In reality, it becomes much more simple because you start to get used to certain numbers, and it's easier than you think. The way to set it up initially is to have for your R value, you have various stop distances. 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, 8 points, 20 points. Just whatever, again, if whatever makes sense. Cluster some of those around areas where it's usable and meaningful. And then you simply go do the math, right? Go do this formula for each of those things. You know what your R value is. You now know what all these stop distances are. You know what the tick value is for the product. So go calculate size, plug it in, write them in, stick it on your desk. You can turn on things in Sierra like grid lines. And so you could quickly take a look. And if you're getting long, right here, you could say, aha, 1.5 of these grids, which you set in 10-point increments for NQ, you know in your mind how much you're just going to learn, and you're not going to forget 10 points, the value in NQ, and $200, and you can then say, oh, it's 1.5 unit, that's $300. Oh, it's 2 units, that's $400. You know what your R value, things like that. Or you can even, again, and it's super simple to do that. You can set up the settings, and I believe there's something here where you just turn them on. Oh, what I would probably do is only do it in the region 1, the price region, right? Okay, so you can size up and get bigger in your best trades, and it doesn't need to be a changing of your R value, of risking 300% of your normal risk on a trade just because of a conviction or whatever. How you can size up and get bigger is to get better, is to improve your entry timing, improve your read, improve your assessment so that you can ultimately get tighter stops as your skill levels grow. That's how, or find places on the chart that make better sense as you playbook and review and learn to get into these ideas. And that's how it's done. Setting and moving stops. We're going to keep this section more simple than like the scratching and stuff, because we're not going to impose a bunch of rules on, if this, then we move our stop here. That's not how this is going to be taught. If you need a beginner friendly way to do that, then you can do so. And just, we can talk about that. And, it's not going to be complex. We can figure it out. Our views that we've identified in terms of initial stop placement here, our view is that we've identified a turning point in the market. Remember, we're picking tops and bottoms. And we have sought to time an entry with that immediate shift. If that is wrong, then we are wrong. We might not be wrong overall, right? So we might re-enter or something, but we are temporarily wrong if that doesn't hold true. We identified a turn and we don't get the favorable excursion from it. It just goes past where we'd identified a turn. We're just wrong. That's how we place stops. During some special situations, we can use something a little differently, momentum stops. If we are a little late or on a breakout style entry or a very high energy move during news releases, whatever, we can kind of our entries will end up very often being a little bit out of what we call the most short term rhythm. For example, I think we talked about this the other day. Let's say there's a kind of a bull flag and it breaks, right? We might find ourselves taking some entries here on the most short term of rhythm. Where's that entry supposed to be? It was supposed to be here, right? It's supposed to be at that shift. So we're getting in quote unquote late on the shortest term of rhythm, but we're getting in perfectly in what's called medium term rhythm. We're going to look at some examples of that today. But real quickly, just like to look at a spot on the chart, let's say we'd identified this as that type of a pattern, right? And we found ourselves getting long over here. Well, we really kind of, if you we should have been long from the turn earlier, potentially, just theoretically, just like this example I'm talking about. But we're getting it here because it's more of a medium term type of break. When and where we do that, we don't necessarily need to go place the stop all the way back down at the low. If we're doing this appropriately, not just on any old wedge or flag kind of pattern, it was just an example. If we're doing this at the right spots, there should be a pretty high level of energy and momentum in what's going on. And we can really set a more intermediate kind of stop level. And ultimately, we're going to be managing a lot of this manually rather than trying to literally move orders. The way we're going to do things is really have essentially a stop at beyond the low or kind of and it's almost more of an emergency stop, or if the trade just immediately goes and stops you out. Once if things are just progressing, we're going to be much more hands on the triggers, doing things rather than imposing things like we talked about yesterday. um so we identify a shift, that's where we're wrong. Momentum stops, medium term rhythm, breakouts, high energy stuff, usually coupled with high energy. Again, if you're going to be using those appropriately, you can't just use them wherever you want. It's pretty rare to use momentum stops. It's more of a just make sure I cover that for you a little bit as an advanced thing. The most simple beginner friendly way to trade, and an absolute okay way. Don't say, oh, beginner, that's not me, I don't want to do that. It's okay. Is to set the stop beyond the swing, for example, and know that it's permanent for the trade. That's how I'm going to treat it. However, I'm going to be banging in and out of trades manually, discretionarily, but that stop is really going to be pretty permanent. I'm not trying to trail it or things like that. I'm not saying I never move a stop, but we'll talk more about it. Moving stops. You very well might use some rules to move stops as a trade progresses. I'm not going to teach it that way. We're going to focus on keeping kind of a hard stop, and we're using our skills for scratching and scaling to handle reducing risk or all-out exits. It's such a dynamic, flowing, discretionary process. I prefer to approach it from that point of view rather than providing rules for moving stops. It's a huge mistake that amateurs make. They move to break even, right? They make all these moves. 1R threat. As soon as the trade is open profits of 1R, I move the stop to break even, right? Things like that. They don't work that well, guys. They don't. They're very costly to most traders who attempt to deploy those kind of things. We need to be smarter. We need to be more in tune with what is happening in a market and when and where we want to continue to have risk on and where we don't want to have risk on. And then it has nothing to do with whether or not we're up 1R in the trade. Most of that stuff is just crutches for people emotionally. Scratching. Likely one of the most important and value-added sections in this course, along with the reentry stuff we're going to talk about. Scratching and reentering essentially becomes most of what we do. And it's one of the hardest things to master. The thing that will have the most impact on P&L, like I started with that heavy statement at the start of this chapter,